we are on the record. This is the videotape portion of the deposition of John Pennington. This deposition is being recorded this 23rd day of March 2016. The time is now 9 a.m. Will the court reporter please swear in the witness so we can proceed?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name for the record.
John Edward Pennington, Jr.
And your current home address.
My current home address is 28120 Northeast 147th Place in Duval, Washington.
How long have you lived at that address?
I have lived at that address for 10 years.
Have you ever had your deposition taken before?
Yes, sir, I have.
And under what circumstances have you had your deposition taken in the past?
My deposition was taken several years ago in a suit filed against Snohomish County by a litigant named Ann Block.
And when you say several years ago, do you have a time frame?
I believe that it was around 2010.
Okay. And what was the claim against Snohomish County in that lawsuit?
I recall that it was based on public records.
And what was your involvement in that? In other words, why do you understand you were being deposed?
My understanding is that she sued, I recall that she sued the county and our department based on public records laws and not releasing public records.
Okay. Have you had your deposition taken on any other occasion?
Not that I recall.
Have you ever testified at trial?
Only in personal divorce.
And when was that?
In 2010
And where was that?
in King County, Washington.
Let me just go through a few ground rules. It's important that we don't overlap, so I'll try not to cut off your answer. You have to try not to anticipate the question, where it's going. It's important that you verbalize your answer, so if you simply nod your head, it's difficult for the court reporter to take that down. It's important that you understand the question, so if for any reason you don't understand it, just say so and I'll repeat it or rephrase it. And it's important that you realize that you're under oath, just as if you were testifying in a court of law. Do you understand those instructions?
Yes, I do.
Are you represented by legal counsel here today?
Yes, I am represented by legal counsel.
Okay. And are you still employed by Snohomish County?
No, I am not employed by Snohomish County.
And when did that employment terminate?
It terminated January the 4th, 2016.
And what were the circumstances under which that was terminated? Namely, were you fired, you elected to leave? What happened?
A new county executive was elected, and his legislative assistant conveyed to me that they were going to go in a new direction and that my position was not going to be needed.
And what was your position at that time?
I was the director of the Department of Emergency Management.
And after you left, was a new director of the Department of Emergency Management brought in?
No.
Okay, so who, as you understand it, has filled your job functions?
My deputy director, Jason Bierman, has filled my responsibilities at the department.
So is he then acting director?
I believe that his role is considered interim.
So and they're apparently then searching for someone to replace you.
I don't have that knowledge.
Okay. What is your educational background, starting with high school?
I graduated from Stratford High School in Nashville, Tennessee.
And what year was that?
1984.
How old are you?
I am 49.
Okay. And that was in 1984?
Yes, sir.
Did you go into college at that point in time?
I did.
And where did you go to college?
I set out for 1 year and then went to Vanderbilt University and Belmont University simultaneously under a Navy ROTC scholarship.
And did you receive a degree?
No, I did not.
How many years did you go to college?
1.5 years there.
And Have you ever received a college degree?
Yes.
And when was that and where?
In 2001, received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration from California Coast University. And in 2012, I received my master's degree in Emergency and Disaster Management from American Military University. And I have a postgraduate certificate from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California in Homeland Security.
Okay. So the bachelor degree you received in 2001, I'm not familiar with that college, so describe that to me.
Online university.
Okay, so it was an online degree?
Correct.
Okay. And then the degree in 2012, was that online as well, or
That
not?
is correct.
And the other education that you received in Homeland Security, was that online?
No, that was through in Monterey, California at the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Homeland Defense and Security. And I am a certified emergency manager through the International Association of Emergency Managers.
Okay. So then let's go through your occupational background after 1984. What have you done for work? Walk me through that, please.
I began in the coffee industry in 1988, I believe 1988, and started a coffee company in the Pacific Northwest, a coffee service company, and roasting small. And then in
What was the name of that?
Timbertown Coffee Company.
Okay.
And then in 1994, I was elected to the State House of Representatives and was subsequently elected to that position for 3 additional terms.
Okay. Then what?
After September the 11th, 2001, I left the State House of Representatives to become the regional director of FEMA for Region 10, Alaska, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. And then in 2006, departed that position to begin the Department of Emergency Management in Snohomish County.
So let's focus on those last two for a moment. So in 2001, when you became the regional director for Region 10 of FEMA, was this an appointment?
It was.
And how did that come about? Is that something you sought out, were sought out? How did that happen?
I received a phone call after coming back from Portland, Oregon, or coming back from Nashville to Portland, Oregon, from an individual at FEMA, and I don't recall who the individual was, asking if I would be willing to come back and interview for the position of FEMA Regional Director based on my experiences along Interstate 5 and with the Kelso, Washington landslide in the previous years. And so I was notified.
So there was apparently a significant landslide in Kelso in 1998, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what was your involvement in that landslide?
I was the state representative for the area, and I resided not too very far from the community, was intimately familiar with the community. And the community had been turned down for a disaster declaration, denied from President Clinton and from FEMA. And I became the advocate who turned the declaration around and got the assistance to the individuals.
Was there a risk to human life as you understood it for the people that lived in that community associated with the landslide?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
No, I don't believe that there was.
Okay. Did you take steps to try to secure funds to buy out owners in that community to move them out of that area?
In my capacity as a state representative, is that what you're asking?
I am.
In my capacity as state representative, after the landslide was completed, or in other words, after the federal government reversed its decision to deny federal assistance to them, as a state representative, I believe I introduced legislation, but I tried to spearhead an effort to buy out the community for the purposes of developing a state park.
Okay. What was the purpose in buying out the community? Were they in danger? Were they no longer able to live there? What was your purpose?
My purpose was to try to help compensate the individuals who had lost their homes, were not going to be made whole in the proverbial sense of the word, and to assist them as any state representative would at that point.
And as part of that effort, did you then spearhead obtaining funding to buy them out?
No, I did not.
Okay, who handled that?
That was, I believe, done through, I don't recall.
Okay. And was there in fact a buyout of property owners?
I don't recall.
Okay.
They did receive federal assistance of some form underneath the Stafford Act, and I think creative mechanisms under the Robert T. Stafford Act.
So then you were head of Region 10 up until 2006 sometime, correct?
That is correct.
And how did you happen to leave your position as head of Region 10? Were you terminated? Did you just voluntarily leave? How did that work?
Snohomish County advertised a position for a newly created Department of Emergency Management. They had no department prior to that. They had a consortium or agreements or interlocal agreements. And I applied and went through a national vetting process to be, and was selected for the position.
And what, in terms of your training, other than the Kelso landslide exposure that you had you had any other training in emergency management up to that point in time?
I had 3 different disasters, federal declared disasters, in Kelso, Washington with the landslide in 1998, 1995, the floods in Woodland, 1996, the floods along Interstate 5 that basically closed Interstate 5 for that entire period of time. So my involvement with the Federal Emergency Management Agency was through the Stafford Act, understanding it. It was also through the Washington Military Department and the Division of Emergency Management, and supporting them as they were building their capacity through a new emergency operations center.
And did you serve in the military for some period of time?
No, I did not.
When did you start with Snohomish County? When in 2006?
I believe the exact date was July the 10th or 11th of 2006.
Okay. And when you started, was your position as the director of the Department of Emergency Management?
Yes, it was.
And to whom did you report within the county?
My direct report was to the deputy director, or the deputy executive of Snohomish County, Mark Soine at the time.
Last name?
S-O-I-N-E, Soine.
And at the point in time when you started, as you've described it, there was no dedicated Department of Emergency Management?
It's my understanding that the department formally was created January the 1st through county code. I wasn't privy to that conversation, but it was in its infancy, and I took over in July of 2006.
Okay. So when you took over in July of 2006, how did you go about setting up a working Department of Emergency Management? Namely, what steps did you take to create that department?
I recall focusing very heavily on what existed from the past, examining what policies and or procedures may have existed, examining the facility, the Emergency Operations Center at the time, beginning the process of talking to some individuals from the department as it was at that time that had remained, and I believe that there were 2 of what their history was, and began building the department based upon that.
So when you started building the department in July of 2006, where was the department located?
It was located at 109th Street, I believe is the exact address, at Painfield, in a facility that dated back to the late 1940s.
So if we look at that, let's say first year of operation, who were your key hires or people that you brought in to help you with the Department of Emergency Management?
I had a deputy director who was technically appointed as deputy director for me, and I believe that was from the previous, from the deputy executive, Mark Soini.
Who was the deputy?
Her name is Chris Badger, Badger. She had been with Snohomish County for a little period of time. I don't recall how long she had been there. And there were two grant-funded individuals who focused on individual Homeland Security grants and on state-funded grants. Tamara Jones, and Bill Ekse, E-K-S-E.
How do you pronounce it?
Ekse.
Ekse.
And there was one other individual who had come over from, I believe she came from the finance department, and her name is Diana Rose, R-O-S-E.
What was the mission of the Department of Emergency Management when you formed it?
To my knowledge, at the time, I didn't see a mission or an established mission or vision for the department.
Okay, maybe I misspoke, but did you establish some sort of mission statement for the department?
The mission or the vision of the department was the standard emergency management mantra of protection of life, property, the economy, and the environment. And the first action that I remember taking on that was reversing that to state the economy over the environment.
Okay. Is it fair to say that one of the primary goals of the department was public safety? Under your management?
No, I don't believe that's accurate.
Oh. Are you familiar with the county's natural hazard mitigation plan?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and was part of the department's function to carry out that plan?
Object to the form.
I believe that saying carry out is a mischaracterization of what our responsibility is with the plan.
Do you know if under the natural hazard mitigation plan, one of the primary functions is protection of public safety?
I don't believe protection of public safety is a word or a phrase that I've seen in that plan, the protection of public safety.
Okay. Protection of human life?
Sure.
Okay. Is it fair to say protection of human life is one of the primary purposes of that plan?
I believe that that's inferred in it, yes.
Okay. And the way you operated the department, is it fair to say that that was one of your goals, to protect human life?
Yes.
Okay. And so in other words, it wasn't just to react to natural disasters after they occurred, but it was try to take steps to mitigate potential losses, including loss to human life, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So when you took over the Department of Emergency Management, one of the risks that you were intending to address was landslide risks, correct?
It was not the priority of our department at that time. My priority was to establish a department and prepare for flood season, which was to ensue within the next 3 months.
Let me put it to you this way. At some point in time after you took over that department, did landslide risk become a priority?
Landslides were placed with every other hazard in the natural hazard mitigation plan.
So that would be one of the
Yes.
risks that you were designed to address, correct?
Yes.
So at what point in time did landslide risks sort of come on the radar for you as being something that was falling within your areas of responsibility?
Based on my experiences in Kelso, I knew that landslide risks were part of the responsibility of any emergency management department or organization. And the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management had adopted an all hazards philosophy, so that the objective was to prepare for all hazards, not just specific hazards.
And did you adopt that same philosophy with the Department of Emergency Management?
Yes, very much.
Okay. So when it came to landslide risks, and you've started up this department, what did you do to educate yourself about the landslide risks in Snohomish County so that you could address them?
My immediate concerns on building the department were the structure and the organization in preparing for floods in 2006.
We may be passing past each other. I'm not interested in what your immediate action was. What I'm interested in is knowing what you did after you became Director of Emergency Management to educate yourself about the landslide risks in Snohomish County.
My knowledge of landslides at that point was based on my experiences as a state representative in the Kelso, Washington landslide.
Okay, but you're not in Kelso anymore, so now you're in Snohomish County. What did you do to educate yourself about the landslide risks in Snohomish County?
In 2006, my knowledge of landslide risk in Snohomish County was based on the existing natural hazard mitigation plan, which was established 2005.
Okay. So I take it then you reviewed the 2005 plan.
I reviewed it, but not extensively.
Okay. What else did you do to educate yourself about landslide risks in Snohomish County?
I didn't do anything other than review the plan and build the department from 2006 forward while addressing at the same time repeated events.
Okay, so let's take the time frame 2006 through 2010. Other than reviewing the 2005 Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan as it applied to landslides, did you do anything else during that 4 or 5 year period of time to educate yourself about landslide risks in Snohomish County?
Yes.
Okay, what else did you do?
We began the process of, I hired a mitigation division director named Jason Bierman. I brought him in for the purposes of focusing on mitigation throughout the county. His primary task was to update what we felt was an inadequate version of the 2005 Hazard Mitigation Plan. He began that process. It was a multi-year process. And we obtained a federal grant called the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant. It was a nationally competitive grant. I set our department off for the purposes of obtaining a grant and updating that mitigation plan so we could more specifically understand the hazards that were in our area. So from 2006 to 2010, our process was to update the plan over a significant period of time, building stakeholders throughout all of Snohomish County, which we did. And that plan was adopted by the federal government in 2010, became active.
Okay. When was Jason Bierman hired?
I believe he was hired originally in 2000, and I believe he was hired in 2007, but he didn't take the position because he took the position and then effectively disappeared. We couldn't understand where he had gone, and he was in effect deployed to, I believe, Iraq or Afghanistan, one of the two. Came back and assumed the position, I believe, in early 2008 and began full-time working on the hazard mitigation plan.
Okay. So again, if we take that time period, other than hiring Mr. Bierman to update the 2005 plan, at least in part, what specifically did you do to educate yourself about the landslide risks and attempt to mitigate those risks between 2006 and 2010?
Object to the form.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
In 2006, not long after coming on in the department, it became very clear that the fall flood season was occurring. There had been fall flood tours that had been going on annually for, I think, a small period of time, a few years. We pulled together a fall flood tour that went out to the Oso community into that neighborhood. And I don't recall the exact month, but it was just prior to the catastrophic flooding that occurred around Election Day, I believe. But there was catastrophic flooding that occurred eventually in the county. That was my first exposure to the direct landslide that was in that community. So
again, my question is, what did you do to educate yourself about landslide risks and mitigate those risks between 2006 and 2010? So far, what I understand is there was a 2006 flood tour, and you saw the Hazel landslide at that time. What else did you do during that 4-year period of time?
I believe that that's my answer.
That's it? Nothing else?
That's my answer.
How about if I take the time period between 2010 and leading up to March of 2014? So that roughly 4-year period of time, let's say. What did you do during those 4 years to educate yourself about landslide risks in Snohomish County or mitigate those risks?
In 2010, the Hazard Mitigation Plan was adopted and approved by FEMA. It was viewed as part of an enhanced mitigation plan, which is a higher threshold. That plan addressed the landslide risks along with other hazards in the county. From 2010 to 2014, we conducted multiple interviews and public outreach about the risk of landslides through data that was public through the National Weather Service, through the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, through the Department of Natural Resources and their landslide outreach efforts. And then in 2013 and 14, the Mount Index river sites in Index contacted our department and contacted me directly and said that they had a slow-moving landslide, something that was happening. And I personally went out to that site on multiple occasions, and leading up to exactly 6 days prior to March 22nd, conducted multiple reverse notifications for the community, conducted multiple town meetings, met with individuals, corresponded with individuals about the landslide that they were experiencing, and personally sent reverse evacuation notifications and respectfully asking them to leave on at least 2 different occasions. And that began 2013 through 2014.
Okay, so let me take a step back. In terms of your knowledge regarding the Hazel landslide, prior to March of 2014, as I understand it, you again made this one visit in the fall of 2006 as part of the flood tour, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, did you make any other visits to the Hazel landslide?
No, I did not.
Okay. And what knowledge did you have about the Hazel landslide and past landslides prior to March of 2014?
In 2006, during the fall flood tour, Chris Badger, who was the appointed deputy at the time, had discussed with me what had happened in the winter of 2006 and the original landslide. During the fall flood tour, when we were out there, or en route to that area, she was talking about the slide and its impacts to the highway and the flooding of the community, and she mentioned the mitigation of the potential impacts of flooding. That was my first initiation into the slide, though I recall in earlier conversations with her from me coming on in July what the department had been doing, because they were currently in the middle of essentially a disaster declaration for that particular slide.
Okay. So in terms of past slides there and any questions about the potential for future slides, did you learn any additional information prior to March 2014 other than what you have described?
No, outside of knowing and understanding that it was a slide-prone area like other areas of the county, including Edmonds and Burlington, Northern Santa Fe, that there were areas that were prone to slides.
Within your department, was there someone who had the, let's say, responsibility to gather information about landslide risks and communicate those to you?
No.
Okay. Let's go back to Mount Index. So this question of a landslide in Mount Index, you're describing the time frame as 2013 and 2014. When actually did that start, as you recall it?
All I know about that landslide in particular is that there had been a small history out there, and I was notified, I believe, in late 2013 by the community, one or two of the individuals, and I began the process of meeting with the community and individuals and corresponding and visiting the community on multiple occasions because they had reached out and let me know that something was happening.
Okay. And this was a slow-moving slide of some sort?
It was my understanding initially that it had been a slow-moving slide, and as I witnessed it, it was a slow-moving slide.
And you made reference to multiple reverse notifications. What is a reverse notification?
Reverse notification is a generic phrase for reverse 911 because reverse 911 is a trademarked phrase now. Reverse notification is the ability for me to get on a laptop computer or a desktop computer and conduct a reverse 911 to your community, to your landline, or to your mobile phone if you're in a system, to ping you to let you know of an impending disaster or risk, or to give to you a message or direction after a disaster about where assistance can occur.
When was that set up within the county, do you know?
In 2007.
Okay. I mean, so for example, if you wanted to send a reverse, essentially 911 emergency message to residents of Steelhead Haven, the capacity or capability of doing that existed in the county from 2007 forward, is that accurate?
Yes.
And other than Mount Index, had you used that system on other occasions for any other landslides?
For any other landslides, I don't recall. It has been used well over 100 times.
As of what date?
As of my departure.
Okay. But do you recall any other landslides where that was used?
I don't recall.
Okay. And describe for me how it was set up at Mount Index, namely, how do you come up with the phone numbers that this would be directed to, this reverse notification?
It is conducted through a program called Alert Sense, which used to be called My State USA. My State USA was purchased in 2007 for approximately $19,000 between the Public Health Department, Public Health District of Snohomish County, and the Snohomish County Department of Emergency Management. The software allows you to draw a polygon around a particular community or lines or anything that you want geometrically shaped, type in a message. That message will go text to voice as well as to emails of anyone who has subscribed to that system. And will send messages to them about outreach or warning or evacuation notifications, and had been utilized, like I said, a lot, including in the Steelhead neighborhood.
When was it used in the Steelhead neighborhood?
I believe it was done on multiple occasions from 2007 forward based on flood, the potential for flooding, and I believe actual flooding.
Okay. And are these notifications something that would be in writing? In other words, would they be on computer or hard copy where we could still see them today, type of thing, of what the notification was?
Absolutely.
Okay. And where are they kept?
They would be kept through either our department or through Alert Sense has the documentation for the particular notifications, including those in Index.
And when you say alert sense, is that within the county or is it some outside entity?
Alert Sense is a company based out of Boise.
Okay. So from 2007 forward, you think both the county would have these notifications that went out to residents and Alert Sense would have copies of those?
Yes.
And so,
Excuse me, can I please get some more water?
Sure.
sure. Yeah, council
I'll get it for
can
you.
give you a glass.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
So when you became aware of this, you've described as slow-moving landslide and index, you talked about multiple reverse notifications that were made and a reverse evacuation order, correct?
That's not exactly correct.
Okay.
I don't have the statutory authority, nor does any emergency manager, to force someone to evacuate. So there was, the phrase that I used was respectfully requesting that you evacuate.
Okay. That's fine. So in terms of the reverse notifications that were made in Mount Index, what do you recall those as being? What were you saying at these various times, the multiple reverse communications?
Well, they're public documents and they're available, but I recall saying that on at least 2 different occasions, we had established a plan for the community that had been cut off by the landslide. They were segmented in half. So the first part of the message, I believe, I recall, was that respectfully, that you were experiencing a slow-moving landslide that poses a risk to the community, and that respectfully request that they leave or evacuate, and if they choose to do that, please contact the following number. That number then was a trigger for us through nonprofits to evacuate the community, including over an active railway and through brush and pathways to get the community out. It also, one of the reverse notifications talked about delivery of services, I believe, and goods to them because they were, again, isolated.
In any of these reverse notifications, did you raise a concern about their personal safety and potential risk to human life?
Yes, I did.
And why was that? What did you see there that was potential risk to human life?
I was concerned about the flooding potential, in particular with that particular landslide, that it would continue to find its way into the Snohomish River and block off part of the channel and start backing up and flooding communities and cut them off and isolate them even more, to the point that we were concerned for the elderly and those who were dependent upon propane or delivered water systems, that their supplies or medical emergencies would not be able to be met through the fire district.
Okay. Any other concern regarding human safety associated with the Mount Index slide?
No, I believe that one of the homes had been destroyed at a point, and most of the people that were within that direct area were no longer in the area and had heeded the messages.
I mean, did you take any steps to evaluate the potential risk posed by the landslide to residents? And just to give you an example, did you bring in the county geologist? Did you ask for a geotechnical study, anything like that?
Yes, I did. I asked the county for a geotech to go in and take a look, as well as the fire marshal, on whether or not the community needed to be red tagged or yellow tagged.
Explain red tag and yellow tag.
Yellow tag essentially prepare to evacuate, and hazard. Red tagged basically that the house is no longer able to be occupied. It's not my domain, but that's my understanding of what the tag system means.
So when you asked for the geotech to come in, would this be something that was in writing?
And actually, I need to step back. I'm not sure I asked for that individual. That individual, I believe, may have already been engaged in the community, and I asked for what the situation was out there.
Do you know who the individual was?
No, I don't recall.
Was he or she a geologist, as you understood it?
I don't recall.
Okay. But you engaged with that person to obtain their evaluation regarding the landslide risk. Is that accurate?
I don't recall the specifics. I just recall that the county was engaged in, and the fire marshal was engaged. And my primary responsibility and job was meeting with the community and notifying the community.
Within Snohomish County, the things that you've described as occurring out at Mount Index, how would those files have been maintained in your department? So now I'm going beyond just the reverse notification issues. I'm to the extent that there was a geotech brought in, or you're corresponding with the geotech about the slide. Where would that be documented within the county?
It would be documented through reverse notification system, through email correspondence, through any activation that we would have had from the EOC, which I believe was activated. I recall it being activated virtually, so not a physical activation, but for the purposes of creating documentation for that specific event, because we anticipated that there was a potential for a federal Stafford Act presidential disaster declaration based on what was happening there, and we were beginning the process of capturing documentation for the purposes of seeking federal assistance or some creative assistance.
Okay. But in terms of, would there be hard files, hard copy files relating to Mount Index?
I think mostly it's electronic.
Okay. And within the department, would there be some sort of sub-file system on the computer as to how that would be maintained? So it would be the Mount Index landslide file. I'm just trying to understand how it would have been maintained.
I believe that it would have been captured through anything regarding our department's direct interaction with them in the context of the Emergency Operations Center would have been captured in SharePoint, which was the software that we were utilizing at the time for managing disasters inside the Emergency Operations Center. Everything else would have been documented through AlertSense or through traditional email correspondence.
Okay. After the I'm jumping around a little bit here, but after the March 22, 2014 OSO landslide, did you go back into the Department of Emergency Management system to see what your department had in its file regarding the Hazel landslide or any risks associated with the Hazel landslide?
No, I don't recall doing
that. Prior to March 2014, did you have any contact with any of the county geologists, and I'm thinking of Jeff Jones in particular, to have him help educate you about landslide risks in Snohomish County?
No, I don't recall that.
So, and then I'm going to sort of go back and make sure I have this wrapped up here. But in terms of educating yourself about landslide risks or mitigation of any of those risks prior to March of 2014, have you covered today for us everything that you remember in that regard?
All of my training, all of my education is based on all hazard risk, all hazards in general, meaning that I'm supposed to not be a specific expert in landslides or floods or earthquakes or wildfires, but the generic all hazard strategic response coordination to those types of events and preparing for those types of events. That's my training, that's my education, that's my background. I have taken individual courses through FEMA on floods. I believe I've even taken an individual online course through FEMA's IS training system on landslides, but I can't validate that for you right here. I've taken literally dozens and dozens of courses.
Okay. I understand your statement, but I just want to make sure I have obtained from you everything you recall that you did to educate yourself about landslide risks in Snohomish County or mitigate any of those risks prior to March 2014. If there's something else you remember, I'm going to ask you about that, but if you don't remember anything else, that's fine.
When I came into the department in 2006, what I did to educate myself on the risks and hazards of the county was to understand what existed previously as far as policies and procedures and then lean on some of the institutional knowledge of individuals who had been around the department, including radio amateur individuals who just knew the county over an extensive period of time. And they mentioned that particular slide in 2006 as the most recent event that included the flooding.
And this is the Hazel landslide, correct?
Yes, sir, correct. And I was educated on the extensive flood potential for the department coming into the next 3 months after assuming in July.
Okay. Anything else in response to my question?
No.
Handing you what's previously been marked as Exhibit 472. It's a Seattle Times article dated March 24, 2014. I should have glanced through that and I have some questions for you about it. And if it's helpful, I can actually direct you to the specific paragraph. It's on the second page of Exhibit 472. It's under the heading, Considered Very Safe. Do you see that heading? Is that a yes?
Yes.
And that's the next paragraph is the one I have some questions about. Have you read those 3 lines?
In the second paragraph under Consider Very Safe?
It's in the first paragraph under Considered Very Safe.
The first paragraph. Yes.
Okay. The paragraph states, his perspective stands in contrast to what John Pennington, head of Snohomish County's Department of Emergency Management, said at a news conference Monday. Quote, it was considered very safe, end quote, Pennington said. Quote, this was a completely unforeseen slide. This came out of nowhere, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Did you in fact make those statements, the quoted statements?
Yes, I believe I made those statements.
So when you made the statement, quote, it was considered very safe, on what basis did you make that statement regarding the Hazel landslide prior to the March 2014 failure?
That was a statement that I made based on my visit during the fall flood tour and subsequent communications with the fire chief and the community regarding floods, and it was in the context of floods.
Well, it was in the context of you were being asked questions by the press following the catastrophic March 22, 2014 landslide, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And in responding to questions about that catastrophic slide, you said, quote, it was considered very safe, end quote, correct?
That's what the quote says, yes.
Okay. And that's what you said?
That is what I said.
Okay. And in making that statement, other than basing it upon your visit to the site in 2006, was there anything else that led you to make that statement?
Yes.
And did you talk to, for example, Chris Badger in advance of making that statement? Did she communicate to you that it was considered very safe?
No.
Did somebody else communicate to you that the Hazel landslide was considered very safe prior to March of 2014?
No.
Okay. Did you believe that to be true prior to March of 2014?
Did he believe what was true?
Did you believe that the Hazel landslide was considered very safe prior to March of 2014?
I had no opinion on whether it was safe. My quote and the context of this quote was based upon the flooding risk in the community that I had had conversations with.
Did you say anything to the press during that press conference about flooding?
Yes, I actually believe I did later.
Well, did you say anything to the press about flooding in the context of your statement, quote, "it was considered very safe," end quote?
My statement was regarding what had occurred, and my knowledge was based upon the fall flood fight when I had two individuals from the Oso community to my left, and we were discussing flooding impacts that were potential because of the 2006 slide and the mitigation efforts that had taken effect on the south side of the river.
After making that statement, did anyone suggest to you that that statement may have been an error, that in fact it wasn't considered to be very safe, namely the Hazel landslide prior to the March 2014 slide?
I was very exhausted, and I don't recall that after the fact.
Okay. I mean, to this date, has anyone suggested to you that that statement was wrong?
I have reviewed very few newspaper articles, but I have read this particular article.
Not my question. So my question is, did anyone, after making this statement, suggest to you that the statement was wrong?
I don't recall.
Okay. Why don't we take just a 5-minute break?
Thank you.
We're going off the record. The time is now 9:52 a.m. We're back on the record. The time is now 9:59 a.m.
Mr. Pennington, on the Mount Index slide, when you sent out the reverse notification to members of the community, respectfully suggesting that they evacuate, did you get compliance, mostly compliance, no compliance? What occurred with that?
We didn't do any analysis of who had left, but I think there may be documentation on who was provided services by the nonprofits that we were coordinating. We had developed a plan for evacuation, and some people took advantage of that.
So you don't know how many people followed your respectful suggestion to leave or not?
If I recall correctly, the people in the immediate area that were adjacent to the side left or were gone already, and the other parts of the community that were impacted, which were by being cut off, several of them left as well.
Okay. You indicated that there were, I believe, similar evacuation suggestions in other parts of the county relating to flooding?
That's correct.
And how many of those were there, do you believe, roughly speaking?
Clarify the question.
Yeah. During the, let's say, the 6 years between 2006 and 2014.
That's
That could be more.
8 years.
That's 8 years. That's why I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician. But during that period of time, that's the time I'm focusing on. Were there other suggested evacuations?
Yes.
And roughly how many were there?
Between 2007 and 2014, most of the messaging that was put out through Reverse 911 was for impending floods or events. For actual evacuation notifications, we rarely would recommend an evacuation unless it was imminent, but we would give people as much advance notification of an impending event, such as a flood that would occur 2 days from now. We would notify your area, in particular your specific neighborhood, and let you know that this potential exists and that you should be prepared to possibly leave.
But in answer to my question, and what I'm asking about is actual evacuation recommendations, You've described the one for Mount Index. Were there any other actual recommended evacuation notices that were sent out between 2006 and 2014?
I recall that there were, but I can't give you an accurate number. But I don't believe that there were very many that actually recommended outright evacuations.
Yeah.
There were of specific neighborhoods, I believe, but I don't have an accurate recollection of what that number would be.
Were there ever any at Steelhead Haven relating to flooding?
I recall that we did reverse notifications up and down the Snohomish River that I'm confident included the Steelhead Haven neighborhood. And the messaging would have been very similar to other messages, which are prepare for flooding or flooding is occurring, which could have also included a message for evacuation. But I'm not certain of that without reviewing records.
Okay, so in answer to my question, you do not recall any other reverse notifications recommending an actual evacuation other than Mount Index, correct?
No, that's not correct. I do recall evacuation notifications for specific communities from 2006 forward based on flooding.
Okay, and which communities were those?
The usual suspects in Snohomish County are the Snohomish Valley, the Stillaguamish Valley, the Snohomish, Lower Snohomish River Valley. So areas in and around Snohomish, areas in and around Gold Bar, areas in and around Index, in and around Sultan, in and around Darrington, Sauk River, westbound all the way to Arlington. They're very flood-prone areas. We know exactly when they are anticipated to flood, and when we are caught off guard, those reverse notifications were very fast and very effective.
And when you say very effective, how so?
The data captures who is actually, the data in Alert Sense, which is the company, captures how many were answered by individuals or responded to. Individuals generally have to respond. They have accepted the phone call.
Oh, I see. So you actually get feedback, if you will, live feedback as to whether people received the message and whether they responded.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And that's just part of the way the system is set up.
Yes, sir.
And so you can kind of go into the system and say, we sent out notice to 100 residents and 95 of them responded.
Correct.
$810.
Mr. Pennington, handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 810. My understanding is that this is a Wall Street Journal article. There's no date on it, but my reading of it is that it occurred Wednesday after the March 2014 OSA landslide. The authors are listed on the last page of the article that includes Zusha Ellenson and others. Have you seen this article
No,
before?
I have not.
Okay. Do you recall having any conversations following the March 2014 slide with Zusha Ellenson?
No, I do not.
Okay. There is a statement that appears on the third page. Its page number in the lower right-hand corner ends with 55. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we move down that page, just about in the middle of that page, it states, quote, John Pennington, Snohomish County's Emergency Management Director, said that after a landslide in 2006, the county spent millions shoring up the area, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
Is that a statement that you made?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay. And describe for me the millions of dollars that the county spent to shore up the Hazel landslide area after the 2006 slide.
Object to the form, foundation.
Go ahead. You can answer.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. The statement was a mistake on my part. It was not millions. And the information came from a conversation with Chris Badger, who was the deputy director, who had told me during the fall floodlight that there had been a million plus spent on this project.
What project?
Meaning, I think the entire project that was the mitigation of that whole area post-2006. So my statement was inaccurate.
Okay. Did you ever communicate to anyone in the news agency after March of 2014 that that statement was incorrect?
No, I believe that the only correction I made, no.
You said you made some correction after you made a statement?
I believed that I had referenced at one point inaccurately that the Tulalip tribe had done mitigation work out there, and that was incorrect as well. And it was the Amish tribe, I believe.
Oh, I see. Okay. But in terms of your statement that the county had spent millions shoring up the area, that was based upon a conversation you had with Chris Badger?
I recall that, yes.
And when was that conversation with Chris Badger?
I believe that conversation was during the fall flood flight tour, or somewhere right around that tour.
Okay. And what did you understand the shoring up was? Namely, you're familiar with the crib wall that was installed, the log revetment out at Hazel and installed in 2006, correct?
Yes.
You saw that when you went out for the flood tour?
Yes, I saw it across the river.
Okay. Is that one of the items you were referring to as shoring up the area?
Yes, the whole area. But my focal point was very squarely on what was beneath my feet at the time in the flooding potential, which was the Army Corps of Engineers and the county's project underneath my feet.
Okay, but in answer to my question, you were referring to, when you say spent millions shoring up the area, that reference included the crib wall, correct?
Object to the form.
You can go ahead and answer.
I believe it was referring to the entire post-2006 event that had occurred there.
Which would include the crib wall, correct?
Object to the form.
My focal point was on what was beneath my feet.
I'm not asking your focal point. I'm asking whether it included the crib wall. Can you answer that question, yes or no?
Object to the form.
Okay, what is the answer?
Can you ask the question one more time, please?
When you made reference to spending millions shoring up the area, did that include the crib wall?
Object to the form.
Yes.
Thank you. You went on to state, quote, "We did everything we could in the community to make them feel safe," end quote. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is that a statement you made?
Yes, I believe it is.
Describe for me, when you reference we, are you referring to the county?
Yes, I'm referring to the county.
Okay. And when you said, "We, the county, did everything we could in the community to make them feel safe," what did the county do prior to March of 2014, that slide, to make the community feel safe?
Object to the form, foundation.
I believe that this is taken out of context. I was focused on the flooding and the mitigation of potential flooding from the impacts of the 2006 slide. The work that the county and the Army Corps of Engineers did, my primary focus was on the safety of the community as it related to the floods impacting them, which occurred repeatedly after 2006 in the community.
After you made that statement, quote, "We did everything we could in the community to make them feel safe," end quote, did you ever retract that statement?
No, I did not.
When you referred to the community, were you referring to the Steelhead Haven community?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So, in essence, when you made the statement that we, the county, did everything we could in the Steelhead Haven community to make them feel safe, did you have any other basis before that other than what you have described to me so far?
From 2007 forward, multiple communications with the community regarding the flood potential and the flood impacts coming in from the slide that was created in 2006.
When you were sending out these flood notifications that they were at risk from flood in the Steelhead Haven community between 2006 and 2014, prior to March of 2014, did you ever send to them any notice about the landslide risk that existed there?
No, I don't recall.
Handing was previously been marked as Exhibit 471. This is an article, upper left-hand corner says Como News. It's dated March 25, 2014. Have you seen this article before?
No, I have not.
Did you ever speak to someone from the Como News?
I believe I did, but I don't recall this name.
Okay. On the first page, about right at the bottom, the very last paragraph, it states, quote, "But John Pennington, director of the County Emergency Department, said local authorities were vigilant about warning the public of landslide dangers, and homeowners were, quote, very aware of the slide potential," end quote. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Did you make that statement?
Yes, I did.
Okay. When you made this part of the statements that says local authorities were vigilant about warning the public of landslide dangers, end quote, what local authorities are you referring to?
I'm referring to our Department of Emergency Management and the state's Department of Natural Resources, along with NOAA and the National Weather Service.
Okay. Describe for me, to the best of your recollection, all of the warnings that were given to the public of landslide dangers by Snohomish County or others prior to the March 2014 Oso landslide.
I personally gave, I believe, at a minimum of 2 interviews publicizing with, I believe her name is Lee Stoll, S-T-O-L-L, and I believe she's with either Cairo or Como. I proactively went out and pushed the issue of landslide risk throughout Snohomish County, beginning in the fall of 2013 and throughout the spring, but in particular the spring of 2014. I did interviews inside our Emergency Operations Center, and I believe we also did an interview at a site in Edmonds that was experiencing a slide at the time. We also did public information and outreach in concert with DNR and with the National Weather Service repeatedly to let individuals know that the landslide warning was heightened throughout the spring.
Spring of which year?
2014.
Mm-hmm.
And quite specifically in the spring of 2014, the index landslide became a relatively highly publicized event in and around Snohomish County because of the actions that we were taking to notify the public and increase their awareness of what was happening.
Anything else?
Not that I can recall.
So these 2 interviews that you believe you did with Lee Stoll in the fall of 2013 and spring of 2014, did you ever see anything published regarding those interviews?
I believe that both of the stories, I recall that both of the stories made the news, and there may have been more, but we were proactively pushing the message of landslide risk when we received data.
Well, what data did you receive in 2013 and 2014 that led the Department of Emergency Management to push the landslide risk issue?
The National Weather Service and NOAA and the Department of Natural Resources consistently push out landslide risks and heightened landslide risks. We would take that material, and if they had not publicized it, we would try to publicize it as much as we could. And then Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad was shutting down at a consistent basis at that point based on slides occurring in the Edmonds-Mukilteo area. So the heightened awareness of landslides at that point was pretty substantial.
Okay. Getting back sort of my question on the question of whether this was ever seen by the public, these two interviews. Have you ever seen these interviews in written form?
No, I don't recall that I have seen them in, I do believe I actually have seen one in written form.
Okay, describe that for me so we can try to find it.
I can't describe it. It was an interview with Lee Stoll.
And who was she with?
Either Cairo or Como.
Okay. Did either of those two interviews mention the Hazel landslide or the Steelhead Haven community?
I don't recall that they did, no.
Okay. Did you do anything, or did the Department of Emergency Management, to your knowledge, do anything during 2013 and 2014 to specifically warn the residents of Steelhead Haven about the heightened landslide risk?
No. Our public information message was based broadly in Snohomish County and specifically to the Mount Index River sites.
When you made that, did those two interviews in the 2013, early 2014 timeframe, did you believe that the Steelhead Haven community at the base of the Hazel landslide was one of the communities at risk?
No, not specifically.
I mean, did you ever meet with anyone in Steelhead Haven prior to March of 2014 regarding the Hazel landslide or the risk there?
No, only the fall flood tour in 2006.
Well, when you did the fall flood tour, did you meet with any residents?
There were two individuals that were over to my left and behind me that had accompanied us or had come out and were just part of looking over the flooding project beneath my feet.
Did you ever, prior to March of 2014, have any discussion with any residents in Steelhead Haven about the landslide risk?
None that I recall.
Okay. After the March 2014 slide, did you have any conversations with anyone in Steelhead Haven about the landslide risk that existed prior to March of 2014?
I don't recall. I was exhausted, and I don't recall that. I'm sorry.
I mean, just so you understand the time frame, anytime after the March 22, 2014 landslide, from that date to the present, have you ever had any conversations with any of the residents of Steelhead Haven who survived about the landslide risk that existed prior to March 2014, or their understanding of it?
I don't recall that.
Okay. So if we go back to this Como News article, the public information that you're describing, these announcements in the spring of 2014 that involved the county, DNR, and the Weather Service, what would each of these announcements say? What were they saying?
And they also included the Everett Herald pushing the message of what was happening in Mount Index and the larger landslide risk in the county at that time. The messages that would come from the state, DNR, or through NOAA, National Weather Service, talked about the excessive amounts of rain, the data that led to the conclusion that there was therefore a heightened landslide risk in all of Puget Sound at that point in western Washington.
Was anything specifically said about the risk at Hazel?
No.
Asked and answered.
No,
Okay.
no, not to my knowledge, no.
If we go back to this article, Exhibit 471, bottom of the first page, there is a further quote attributed to you. Quote, homeowners were very aware of the slide potential, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
And is that a statement you made?
It is.
And what did you base that statement on?
On the public information strategy and messaging that had occurred throughout the entire spring of the aforementioned issues we just discussed, as well as the hyper-focus at that point, at that specific time, on what was happening in Index.
At the time you made that statement, did you have any basis to know one way or the other whether residents of Steelhead Haven, homeowners there, were aware of the slide potential associated with the Hazel landslide?
No, I had no basis for knowing if they fully understood the message. Strategy was very broad in notifying the entire county as much as possible, through any means possible, of the generic risk of landslides, the heightened risk, and specifically what was happening in the Index area at that time.
Okay, but you understand my question relates to Steelhead Haven and the Hazel landslide?
I do understand that.
And it's fair to say that you have no basis to know whether anybody living there was aware of the slide potential prior to the March 2014 slide. Is that accurate?
Asked and answered.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Then on the next page, it's, I guess I'll call it the second paragraph, but it's the third line down. It states, quote, we've done everything we could to protect them, end quote, Pennington said. You see that?
I do.
Okay, is that a statement you made?
I believe it is.
So when you say we've done everything we could, was that the county?
That was referring to my department and the county in general.
Okay. And when you're referring to them, you were referring to the residents of Steelhead Haven, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So when you said, in essence, we, the county, have done everything we could to protect the residents of Steelhead Haven, what did you base that upon?
That was a quote based on the flooding potential in the area and the mitigation of potential impacts of flooding from the 2006 slide.
Well, you understood at the time you made that statement that the focus was the landslide that had occurred 3 days earlier, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever tell anyone I wasn't referring to the landslide risk, I was just referring to the flooding risk?
I believe I tried to clarify my statements a few days later that my focal point had been with the community, very specifically to the flood impacts that could be derived out of the 2006 channel migration.
Did you ever send out a correction to this statement that we, the county, had done everything we could to protect the residents of Steelhead Haven, to make it clear that you were only talking about flooding risk, not about landslide risk?
No, I'm not a public information officer, and I don't know if they did that.
Well, you know how to do a correction, correct? You did that on some other statement, correct?
I'm not a public information officer.
Do you know how to make a correction to a statement you've made?
Yes,
Okay, you did that on other occasions, correct?
I believe I did.
Okay, and you didn't correct your statement, we've done everything we could to protect them, correct?
I believe that this is taken out of context.
Did you make a correction on that statement?
I don't recall that I did.
$811.
pending what's been marked as Exhibit 811. This is a article in Time. It's dated March 25, 2014. Have you seen this article before?
No.
And my questions relate to the, I'm going to say the last couple of paragraphs on the first page and the first paragraph on the second page.
You can read the whole thing, obviously.
Yeah, I'd like that. Okay.
So on the bottom of the first page, there's a second paragraph up from the bottom, starts with the word residence.
Yes.
Okay. It states, residents of the small town devastated by a massive mudslide knew there was a high risk of this kind of disaster in the area, according to a Washington state official, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
Is that a statement you made?
No.
Okay. Do you have any idea who the Washington state official was who made that statement?
No, I do not.
Okay. Then if we go down to the next paragraph, it states, quote, this entire year we have pushed message after message that there's a high risk of landslides, said John Pennington, Director of Snohomish County Emergency Management, end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
And you have covered that statement, correct? Is there anything else that formed the basis of that statement other than what you've already testified to?
I don't understand the question.
Okay. Did you make that statement?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I made this.
Okay. And my question is, you have addressed, I believe in your earlier testimony, the basis for that statement, the messages that were given. Is there any other basis for that statement other than what you have already testified to? Do you understand that?
I believe so. I made the statement. I recall making the statement.
What was the basis for the statement?
I think everything that we've already just discussed on the high risk of landslides based on the excessive rainfall and the National Weather Service, NOAA, DNR, the data.
Okay. You then went on to state, quote, the dangers and the risks are known, end quote. Did you make that statement?
I don't know if I made that statement. It's in quotes, but I don't know if I made that specific statement.
You may have, you may not have.
I don't recall.
Okay. As of March 25, 2014, did you believe the, quote, dangers and the risks are known, namely the dangers and risks that led to the March 2014 Oso landslide?
I need to ask you to ask me that one more time, please.
In March 2014, following the landslide,
Following.
did you believe that the dangers and the risks were known that that type of landslide might occur?
Check to the form.
No, I do not believe that the magnitude of that type of landslide was known.
Okay, and I'm not just asking about magnitude, but were the dangers and the risks known?
Object to the form.
I believe that the dangers and the risks of the potential for landslides were known throughout the entire area and the entire region at that time.
Do you know what was or wasn't known by the residents of Steelhead Haven?
No, I do not.
And then if you go to the top of the second page. There's a quote attributed to you. Quote, "We did a great job of mitigating the effect of smaller slides," Pennington said. "It haunts me because we did everything we could have done and the community did feel safe," end quote. You see that?
I do.
Okay. So you're talking about slides in that paragraph, correct?
I don't believe that I am. I believe I'm talking about the effects of slides, which in my case is about the flooding of the neighborhood, which had been occurring from 2006 forward.
Okay. So when you said, well, first, did you make the statement, quote, "We did a great job of mitigating the effect of smaller slides"?
I believe I did make that statement.
And when you made that statement, did you indicate that you really weren't talking about landslides, you were talking about flooding?
This particular paragraph, I'm talking about the community and the impacts from the 2006 slide as it related to flooding hitting the community.
So now my question, did you indicate, did you verbalize, did you say to somebody at that point in time, "I'm not talking about landslides, I'm talking about the effects of flooding"?
No, I don't believe I did.
Did you ever correct that statement?
Check to the form.
Did you ever send out a correction to that statement?
No, I did not
Object to
send
the
out a,
form.
no, I did not send out a correction.
Okay. Did you ever send out any indication that it was inaccurate in some respect? Namely, it only applied to flooding, it didn't apply to landslides.
Object to the form.
No, I don't recall making a correction to that end.
Okay. So when you said, well, did you make the statement, quote, "It haunts me because we did everything we could have done and the community did feel safe," end quote. Do you see that?
I very much recall making that statement.
Okay. And when you said we did everything we could have done, did you indicate to anyone that that is in reference only to flooding, not landslides?
No.
And when you said the community did feel safe, on what did you base that statement?
On my interaction with the community in the fall flood fight and the subsequent interactions through the fire district, the fire chief, preposition of sand and sandbags in multiple events from 2006 forward. It wasn't one-way communication.
Pardon me?
It was not one-way communication. We received information back from the community on floods that they were fine, that they felt good, they needed sand or they didn't need sand, they needed bags or they didn't need bags.
This all relates to the flood fight that occurred in January of 2006?
For every flood event from 2006 forward in that particular area.
Okay. Did anyone from the community ever indicate to you that he or she or the community felt safe in terms of any landslide risk?
In 2006, during the flood fight, the individual that was to my left, as I was looking down at vegetation and a natural retention wall for flooding, and had looked across at the slide, and the individual that was behind me, I looked down and I said, "Are you okay with this?" The exact phrase, "Are you okay with this?" And he shook his head and went, "Yeah," and was focused on flooding. That was my interaction.
Okay, but you understand I wasn't asking about flooding. You understand I was asking about landslide risk?
That was my interaction with the community in the fall of 2006.
And you had no interaction with the community about landslide risk, correct?
Not beyond that point in time, correct.
Not beyond flooding, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I got your copy, didn't you, guys?
No.
Just let me see
Yeah.
it.
812.
Mr. Pennington, handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 812, which is entitled Snohomish County Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, Volume 1, final, March 2005. Have you seen this document before?
I have seen this document.
So earlier in your testimony, you talked about, I believe, reviewing this natural hazard mitigation plan after you started in 2006. Is that accurate?
I reviewed it not extensively because we began the process of updating the plan pretty immediately.
And then I have some questions about statements in this document. If you turn to what is page ES2, it's at the bottom of the page. Do you see that page?
Yes.
Okay. It talks about the plan development methodology. And phase 2 is to assess the risk. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then in that paragraph, it indicates, quote, the Snohomish County Department of Emergency Management had contracted with the University of Washington's Institute for Hazard Management and Planning to
Hazard mitigation.
hazard mitigation and planning to update the Snohomish County Hazard Identification and Vulnerability Analysis, HIVA. You see that?
I do.
Did you ever see that document? Was there some sort of hazard identification and vulnerability analysis performed by the University of Washington for Snohomish County?
I don't recall this was done prior to my coming to the department.
Yeah, and it's not my question. I was just asking.
I
whether
don't recall.
you ever saw that
I don't
document.
recall.
Okay. It then goes on to state that this update would use the best available science and technology to create a visual representation of hazards in the form of geographic information system mapping to be used in all stages of emergency management. Preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that refresh your recollection? Did you ever see any sort of visual representation of hazards prepared by the University of Washington?
I've seen documents attached to this, and it's called a HIVA, and I've seen the HIVA, but I've not, but it has been many, many years ago. And again, this is a document created for at least a 2-year plus period before I was ever with the department.
At the bottom of page ES3, so it's the next page rather, it talks about mitigation, guiding principle, goals, and objectives. Do you see that?
Yes.
And goal number 1 is to prevent natural hazard-related injury and loss of life. Do you see that?
Yes.
And when you took over the department, did that remain to be one of the goals?
Not preventing natural hazard-related injury and loss of life. The stated goals were preservation and protection of life, property, the environment, and the economy. Very succinct.
Well, did you understand that one of the purposes of your department, the Department of Emergency Management, was to prevent natural hazard-related injury and loss of life?
Object to the form.
I think it's inferred in the generic statement and the generic principles of emergency management.
Right. And as part of the Department of Emergency Management, while this plan, the 2005, was still in effect, was it part of your mission to carry out that goal?
It was the department's responsibility to take the adopted plan as it was and to try to mitigate based on strategies that are funded and formed at the state of Washington through the Emergency Management Council. It's a process that essentially takes mitigation money after a disaster up to a percentage, now 20%, and is used to mitigate not specifically where the disaster occurred but statewide. this document helps to guide the strategy for mitigating the county along with other counties when mitigation monies become available. So it's a strategic document for, if we are going to mitigate, here's how it should be accomplished. Here's what we would like to do.
Let me put it to you this way. Was one of the goals of the Department of Emergency Management after you took over, as long as the 2005 plan was in effect, was one of the goals to prevent natural hazard-related injury and loss of life?
It was to prevent and protect and preserve the life, property, environment, and economy of Snohomish County and those that reside in it.
If you turn to page 21-3, it's the second to the last page. It's table 21-1. It talks about countywide mitigation initiatives.
Yes.
And number
Hang on a second, where are you?
Second to last page of the exhibit.
No, I have that, but where are you on, it's a table?
So far, I've just identified that it was a table.
Oh, I
I'm
thought you were,
getting, getting down to looking at a portion of it. So, topic number 5, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And so under countywide mitigation initiatives, topic 5 is sponsor and maintain a natural hazards informational website to include the following types of information: hazard-specific information such as warnings, private property mitigation alternatives, important facts of risk, and vulnerability. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and that, the lead agency was supposed to be your department, DEM, with support from SWM, which is what, storm water management?
Surface water management.
Pardon me, surface water management. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the timeline was to do this in short term, right?
That's as it is written.
Okay. When you took over the Department of Emergency Management, was that done?
No. To my knowledge, it was not done, not within the Department of Emergency Management.
Do you know why it was not done?
No, I do not. We had websites that we developed. We had information that we pushed. Beginning in July of 2006, when I took over, our primary objective was to get an organizational structure underneath us that would allow us to respond to anything coming in the fall flood flight.
If you turn to the next page, it sort of shows priorities. And for item number 5,
But I do not know if surface water management took that responsibility from DEM upon the department being formed after this document was created. So I don't know if surface water management may have done that.
you're not aware of them having done it.
I don't know.
Okay. So again, on this item number 5 we've been talking about, on the next page there is a prioritization chart, and when it talks about setting up this system, it indicates priority is high. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So after you took over, did anyone communicate to you that it was not a high priority for your department to set up this natural hazards information website, which would include hazard-specific information such as warnings, private property mitigation alternatives, and important facts on risk and vulnerability?
I believe that some of this information may reside with surface water management and not my department until the 2010 plan, where more information was provided based on our department's involvement with the mitigation plan at that point.
You understand that wasn't my question?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Really? Okay, let's try it again. Did anyone communicate to you that it was no longer a high priority for your department, along with support from SWM, to go ahead and sponsor and maintain a natural hazards informational website to include the following types of information: hazard-specific information such as warnings, private property mitigation alternatives, important facts on risk and vulnerability.
I don't recall that, but I recall under CRS, which stands for Community Rating System, that surface water management in Snohomish County had been a designated lead for establishing high standards and thresholds that involve mitigation that may include this information.
Did anyone ever tell you that this was not a high priority for your department?
No, I do not recall that.
Eight 13.
Mr. Pennington, handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 813. It's a Department of Emergency Management response to performance audit. It apparently is authored by you. It's dated August 11, 2006. Is this a document you, in fact, authored?
No, it is not.
It's a document that you sent to the performance auditor.
Yes, it is a document that I sent to her.
Okay. It came out under your signature, if you will, under you as director of the department, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and who, in fact, did the work for you?
This was a response to recommendations based on an audit that I responded to.
Okay. And did you review the document, namely Exhibit 813, the performance audit response, before it was sent out?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay. What do you recall about the performance audit? In other words, I'm getting the impression from this that there were some criticisms that had been made about the performance of the Snohomish County Department of Emergency Management. And is that, in fact, did the audit contain some sort of criticisms?
What I recall is that the audit had been scheduled before, as the new department was created in January, that as part of the creation, that the former county executive, Aaron Ridden, asked that a performance audit be done of what existed in emergency management in Snohomish County. Not of the department, but what actually existed for emergency management throughout the county. When I came on board in January, I met with Kimber Waltmanson, and I believe she was either in process of this or was just in the infancy of it beginning. And these were recommendations that were actually made to help guide the department forward, as opposed to critiquing as much what had existed in the past. It was an examination of what existed in the past and as a pathway forward, potentially.
Okay. The very first two sentences in your response state, quote, "The Snohomish County Department of Emergency Management takes seriously its mission. There's no greater challenge to a government and its leaders than the protection of its citizens," end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
Those are words you made?
They are.
You agreed with that statement when you made it?
I do.
You agreed with that statement when you left the department, correct?
I do.
Under recommendation number 9, there is a statement, quote, DEM should ensure preparedness for all hazards and alignment of activities with Snohomish County hazards, including the following, and then we don't know what the rest of that statement was. Do you see that? What I'm referring to?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's a response, and this is the response that you submitted was in part, quote, "We concur strongly with recommendations to enhance our focus on mitigation and to develop additional hazard-specific plans relevant to Snohomish County, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did your department ever develop a hazard-specific plan relating to landslide risk?
I do not believe that we did.
Handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 814, this is a email, apparently from you to SXO, dated December 13, 2007. It's regarding landslide and debris removal guidance, and importance is high. Did you author that email?
I authored the forwarding of this email.
Okay. And what is SXO?
I believe it's the abbreviation for the Executive Office's Department Directors.
And so I understand it then you're sending this on to all of the executive officers and department directors in Snohomish County. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think so.
And the message is coming from, what you're forwarding is coming from the Washington State EMD. You see that?
Yes.
And from a person by the name of Donna Voss. Do you know who she was?
Yes.
And who was she?
She had worked for the Emergency Management Division, and I had some interaction over time with her from FEMA, and she's an employee of EMD.
And describe for me what, as you understand it, the role of the Washington State EMD is. And is that Emergency Management Department?
Division.
Division, okay. And so describe for me what the role of that entity was back in 2007.
Subject to the Forum Foundation.
Based upon your knowledge, interaction.
Well, based upon my knowledge, experience, and interaction with them, they are the state's lead for emergency management. They are underneath the military department and the adjutant general. They have a director, and their job is to coordinate with local and tribal emergency management organizations for emergency management.
Okay. So from the email list that is being sent to by Donna Voss on December 13 of 2007, it appears that there are messages that come out from the Washington State Emergency Management Division to a bunch of different counties, correct?
I believe that's accurate.
Okay. How frequently would you, in your role as the Department of Emergency Management for Snohomish County, receive messages from the Washington State EMD?
Frequently. Infrequently before disasters and frequently after.
Okay. And this message relates to landslides and mudslide sites. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so then if we go down to the bottom of the first page in her message, it indicates, quote, under disaster declaration number 1734, DRWA, December 2007, severe storms and flooding, FEMA will have geotechnical experts available to review the landslide and mudslide sites. Guidance will be given on whether a geotechnical study is needed. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Within Snohomish County, did you take advantage of that offer to have a geotechnical study performed by experts that FEMA had available of any landslide or mudslide site?
Under this, no, and I believe that disaster 1734 in December of 2007 may have been just the Linwood area and not included in the original declaration, I believe. And if my memory is correct, we had no landslides attached to anything under this disaster declaration. And it was a very specific area of the South County, I believe.
It's fair to say that certainly as of this date, December 2007, you were aware that FEMA could make available geotechnical experts to review landslides and mudslides, correct?
It's one of the basic tenets of FEMA's yes. Yes.
Okay. So, during the period of time you were the Director of Emergency Management in Snohomish County, did you ever take advantage of that? Did you ever have a geotechnical expert review any landslide site in Snohomish County?
No, not that I recall.
Were you aware that following the January 2006 slide, Vaughn Collins and Steve Thompson in Snohomish County had essentially suggested or recommended that a geotechnical study be performed of the Oso landslide?
Check to the form that mischaracterizes.
You can go ahead and answer.
I don't recall that.
Can you hand me that one back for a second? Let's see. Sure.
I've got it memorized. I could give you mine.
Okay. So, okay. Directing your attention to what's previously been marked as Exhibit 8. It's an email exchange in late January of 2006 that involved Steve Thompson and Vaughn Collins and others relating to Steelhead Drive follow-up. Did you see that?
Early 2006, not late 2006.
I thought I said January, but maybe I didn't. It's in January 31 of 2006. Okay. Have you seen this document before?
Never.
Okay. Did you know who Vaughn Collins was? Have you ever met Vaughn Collins?
I don't recall that name.
Okay. Did you know who Steve Thompson was?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have interactions with Steve Thompson in your role as Director of Department of Emergency Management?
Yes.
Okay. And how frequent would those interactions be?
At cabinet meetings on a weekly basis and during activation of the Emergency Operations Center.
Okay. If you look down on the first page to the email from Vaughn Collins that was sent to Joan Lee, John Engel, Chris Nelson, Steve Thompson, Owen Carter regarding Steelhead Drive follow-up, I have questions for you about a couple of statements in there. So the message goes on to state, Chris and I talked some about near and longer term monitoring and analysis items here. We were thinking public safety primarily, but the cost could be shared with the tribe probably. Item number 1, have a geotechnical evaluation of the slide done. Could additional slides run out further? Has this slide created additional instabilities at the upper end where further movement would be closest to existing homes? Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Were you aware that that recommendation had been made?
Object to the form mischaracterizes.
No, I've not seen this document before.
You knew who Steve Thompson was, correct?
Yes.
Did he ever mention to you that that recommendation had been made?
Object to the form.
No, I do not recall that.
Okay. Did you know Joan Lee?
No, I do not recall that name.
Did you know John Engel?
Yes, I know John Engel.
Okay. Did John Engel ever tell you that that recommendation had been made?
Object to the form.
No, I do not recall that.
Okay. Did you know who Owen Carter was?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Did Owen Carter ever mention to you that that recommendation had been made?
Object to the form.
No, I do not recall that.
If someone following the 2006 landslide had notified you that they were recommending a geotechnical evaluation of the Hazel landslide because they were concerned as to whether additional slides could run out further, is that the type of thing that your department could have done? Namely, could it have taken on the responsibility of arranging for a geotechnical study?
Object to the form.
I believe in the department's infancy, the answer would be no. As the department grew over time, I believe the answer would be yes.
Okay. So let me put it to you this way. If we look at the time period between 2006 and 2014, prior to the March 2014 slide, is it fair to say that if someone had suggested and recommended a geotechnical study be performed on the Hazel landslide because there was a public safety concern, is that something that the Department of Emergency Management could have taken on and arranged?
Object to the form.
I don't believe that we would have taken on and arranged. I believe that we would have potentially facilitated the procurement of someone that could have done it. In other words, finding the money for someone to do it, not the technical expertise itself.
Right. But that is something, that is the type of project that the Department of Emergency Management could take on, correct?
Object to the form.
I think I made myself clear that it is not something that we would take on as a direct responsibility of the department, but we'd be able to work with those individuals in these departments who are the geotechnical experts to facilitate the funding of those projects if
Right.
they sought them.
And you either facilitated or otherwise pursued information regarding a geotechnical study at Mount Index, correct?
I believe it was either submitted to me or I submitted to them information about what was going on out there.
Did you know in your role as head of the director of the Department of Emergency Management how to go about obtaining a geotechnical study?
Yes, but that would be to go back to these particular individuals.
Right. I mean, for example, you knew that Jeff Jones was a geologist in the department and that you could communicate with him, correct?
I didn't know Jeff Jones personally, but I knew to go back to Public Works if there were geotech-related issues that needed to occur.
So that would be people like Steve Thompson you could go back to, correct?
Correct.
Excuse me, counsel. We have 1 minute of media remaining.
That's not much. Why don't we take a break?
This is the end of disc number 1. This deposition will continue on disc number 2. The time is now 11:06 a.m. going off the record.